Sometimes you read something that just completely flips how you see the world. Well, for a lot of people in feminist theory, Chandra Talpade Mohanty's 1988 essay, Under Western Eyes, was exactly that. It's this incredibly powerful piece that asked a really tough, kind of uncomfortable question: were Western feminists, with all their good intentions, maybe doing more harm than good? So, yeah, let's unpack that.
I mean, think about it. The goal was amazing, right? Western feminists wanted to build this global sisterhood, to stand in solidarity with women all over the world. But Mohanty comes along and asks, what if the way you're writing, the way you're researching, is actually imposing a very specific Western viewpoint on everybody else? It's this idea that maybe it was a new kind of colonization, not about taking land, but about taking over ideas. And that super provocative thought, that's really the heart of her whole argument.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with what she calls the problematic gaze. Then we'll get into her most famous idea, the third world woman construct. After that, we'll look at how this image gets created, check out her alternative, and finish up with why context is absolutely key.
So Mohanty looks at a whole bunch of Western feminist writing from that time, and she sees this pattern. Even with the absolute best intentions, it felt like they were looking at the rest of the world through this one single Western lens. And it wasn't just, a different perspective. It was more like putting a filter on a camera that flattens everything out. It just erased the incredible diversity of women's lives and kind of silenced what their actual unique struggles were all about.
And this quote from her essay, it just hits the nail on the head. She's really clear that she isn't trying to call out individual writers. She's looking at a much bigger pattern. It's about how the language itself within these feminist texts was basically creating a fictional character, this single, unchanging third world woman. So, what in the world is that? What does she mean by that?
Okay, and this is super important to get right. Mohanty is not talking about a real person or a real group of people. Nope, she's talking about a construct, a stereotype, a made-up image that she calls the third world woman. It's this idea that basically takes millions and millions of completely different people and just squishes them into one tiny, oversimplified box. Basically, what this construct does is it takes women from all these incredibly diverse countries, cultures, and backgrounds, and just throws them all into one big pile. And what's the one thing that defines them in this view? It's not their strength, it's not their creativity, it's not their unique histories. Nope, it's their oppression. They are defined first and foremost as victims. And this stereotype, it gets really, really specific. As Mohanty breaks it down, this imaginary woman is almost always painted with the exact same brush. She's ignorant, poor, stuck in tradition. Her life is seen as limited, incomplete. She's defined by what she supposedly lacks, not by what she has. Her entire being is seen through this one single lens, suffering.
So this is where the hidden logic really comes out. The only reason this stereotype of the oppressed third world woman even makes sense is because it's being silently compared to its opposite, the idea of the liberated modern Western woman. It's a binary, see? One is seen as educated and free because the other is portrayed as victimized and tradition-bound. And what that does, without anyone even having to say it, is it sets up this unspoken hierarchy. It's a ranking of who's ahead and who's behind.
Okay, so how does this happen? How does this stereotype actually get created? Well, Mohanty doesn't just point out the problem and leave it there. She's like a detective. She pinpoints the exact methods, the analytical traps that even well-meaning scholars were falling into that led them to create the same distorted picture again and again. So she lays out these common ways of analyzing things. For instance, a study might look at women only as victims of male violence, or only as victims of their family structures, or only as victims of religious rules. And look, these are all absolutely real issues, no doubt about it, but the problem is when that's the only thing you focus on. You end up defining an entire group of people just by what is done to them. They become passive objects, not active people who make choices, who resist, who navigate their own incredibly complex lives. And this is the real kicker. This is the core methodological mistake. These approaches all start with the assumption that women is just this already existing unified group, like they're all on the same team before the game even starts. But Mohanty says, no, that's completely backwards. A person's identity as a woman isn't the starting point. It's the result of their specific culture, their history, their economic reality. You can't possibly understand who they are until you first understand the context that made them. But here's the thing, Mohanty isn't just about critique. She doesn't just tear down the old way of doing things. She actually shows us a better path forward.
She asks, okay, so what would an analysis look like if it didn't fall into these traps? And the answer for her is all about the power of specificity. It's about moving away from these huge generalizations and zooming in on the details.
And she doesn't just leave it as an abstract idea. She points to a real-world, concrete example of what this better approach looks like in action. And that example is a study by a sociologist named Maria Mies about lace makers in India. This study basically becomes her model for doing feminist scholarship the right way. Just look at what makes this study so different. Mies doesn't start with a giant category like women in India. No, she starts with a very specific group, lace makers in a town called Narsipur. She digs into how the idea of the housewife is used to control their work. But, and this is key, she also shows how these women navigate and even resist those very structures. What you get is a picture that's messy, it's complex, it's real, it's anything but monolithic.
So what's the secret sauce here? What makes this approach so much better? It's powerful because it starts from the ground up. It begins with real people in a real place, and it builds the theory out from there. It shows women as agents in their own lives, not just passive victims of circumstance. And, this is so important, it connects their very local, specific situation to the massive global economic forces that affect, well, all of us.
And all of this brings us to Mohanty's big takeaway. Her goal was never to tear down feminism. Not at all. It was to build a smarter, stronger, more self-aware version of it. It's really a call to rebuild the whole idea of global sisterhood, right from the foundation. To move it off the shaky ground of just assuming we're all the same, and onto the solid bedrock of real, hard-won solidarity.
You see, her critique is meant to be constructive. She's basically arguing that if Western feminism can just become more self-aware, if it can recognize its own blind spots, its own position of power, it can actually become a much more effective political ally. It can build real, genuine coalitions that actually work across all kinds of borders.
And this really gets to the core of her whole political vision. Real solidarity isn't something you just get for free because you happen to share a gender. No way. It has to be built, carefully, piece by piece. It takes hard work. The hard work of understanding and truly respecting the massive differences that exist in women's lives. Just pretending those differences aren't there, that doesn't create unity. It creates a hollow alliance that's going to crumble the second it's put to the test.
And so we're left with the big question that Mohanty's work poses to all of us. It's really the central challenge for any movement that wants to be global. How do we build powerful alliances and fight for justice together while also truly honoring the specific, complex, and often very different realities of each other's lives? It's a question that, honestly, is just as urgent and important today as it was back in 1988.